So our poor wanderer went forth and found all as the night wind had said, and plucked the 11th rod and smote the dragon, and immediately the lion became the prince, and the dragon a princess again. But she forgot the counsel which the night wind had given. The false princess watched her opportunity, and took the prince by the arm, and carried him away. Thus the unfortunate traveler was again forsaken and forlorn. But she took courage and said, "As far as the wind blows, and so long as the cock crows, I will journey on till I find him once again." She went on for a long, long way, till at length she came to the castle whither the princess had carried the prince, and there was a feast prepared. And she heard that the wedding was about to be held. "Heaven aid me now," said she, and she took the casket that the sun had given her, and found that within it lay a dress as dazzling as the sun itself. So she put it on, and went into the palace. And all the people gazed upon her, and the dress pleased the bride so much that she asked whether it was to be sold. "Not for gold and silver," she answered, "but for flesh and bone." The princess asked what she meant, and she said, "Let me speak with the bridegroom this night in his chamber, and I will give thee the dress." At last the princess agreed, but she told her chamberlain to give the prince a sleeping draught, that he might not hear or see her. When evening came, the prince had fallen asleep, and was led into his chamber, and she sat herself down at his feet, and said, "I have followed thee 7 years. I have been to the sun, to the moon, and the night wind to seek thee, and at last I have helped thee to overcome the dragon. Wilt thou then forget me quite?" But the prince slept so soundly that her voice only passed over him. And seemed like the murmuring of the wind among the fir trees, when she was led away and forced to give up the golden dress. And when she saw that there was no help for her, she went out into the meadow and sat herself down and wept. But as she sat, she bethought herself of the egg that the moon had given her. And when she broke it, there ran out a hen and 12 chickens of pure gold that played about, and then nestled under the old one's wings, so as to form the most beautiful sight in the world. And she rose up and drove them before her till the bride saw them from her window, and was so pleased that she came forth and asked her if she would sell the bride, not for silver or gold, but for flesh and blood. "Let me again this evening speak with the bridegroom in his chamber." Then the princess thought to betray her as before, and agreed to what she asked. But the prince went to his chamber. He asked the chamberlain why the wind had murmured so in the night. The chamberlain told him all, how he had been given sleeping draught, and a poor maiden had come and spoken to him in his chamber, and was to come again tonight. Then the prince took care to throw away the sleeping draught. And when she came and began again to tell him what woes had befallen her, and how faithful and true to him she had been, he knew his beloved wife's voice, and sprang up and said, "You have awakened me as from a dream, for the strange princess had thrown a spell around me." This guy just can't catch a break. so that I had altogether forgotten you. But heaven hath sent you to me in a lucky hour. And they stole away out of the palace by night, secretly, for they feared the princess, and journeyed home, and there they found their child, now grown, comely and fair, and lived happily together to the end of their days. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given the child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else. So she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here's a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, and don't peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand on it. Her grandmother lived out in the woods, half a league from the village. And just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said he. "Thank you kindly, Wolf." "Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature. What a nice plump mouthful. She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood, and then he said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look around? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in this wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing there and here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." And so she ran from the path into the woods to look for flowers. And whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it and got deeper and deeper into the woods. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door.
Who is there?
Little
Red Riding Hood,
replied the wolf.
She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door. Lift the latch,
called out the grandmother.
I am too weak and cannot get up. I am too weak and cannot get up.
The wolf lifted the latch, and the door flew open, and without saying a word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on her way. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself,
Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today. And at other times, I like being with grandmother so much.
She called out,
Good morning,
but received no answer. So she went into the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother, with her cap pulled far over her face and looking very strange.
Oh, grandmother, said she, what big ears you have. Better to hear you with, my child,
was the reply.
But grandmother, what big eyes you have,
she said. Better to hear you with, my dear.
But grandmother, what large hands you have.
Better to hug you with.
Oh, but grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have.
The better to eat you with. And scarcely had the wolf said this than, with one bound, he was out of bed and swallowed up Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loud. And the huntsman was passing the house and thought to himself, How the old woman is snoring. Let's see if she wants anything. So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. I do find thee here, thou old sinner, said he. I have long sought thee. Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the little Red Riding Hood shining. And then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out crying.
Oh, how frightened I have been! How dark it is inside the wolf!
And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched great stones, with which they filled the wolf's body, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he fell down at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. the grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Red Riding Hood had brought and revived, but Red Riding Hood thought to herself,
as long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so.
It is also related that once when Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to her grandmother, another wolf spoke to her and tried to entice her from the path. Red Riding Hood was, however, on her guard and went straight forward on her way and told her grandmother that she had met a wolf and that he had said good morning to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes that if they had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up.
"Well,"
said the grandmother, "we will shut the door that he may not come in." Soon afterward the wolf knocked and cried,
"Open the door! Open the door! Grandmother, I am Little Red Riding Hood, and I am fetching you some cakes."
But they did not speak or open the door, so the gray beard stole twice or thrice around the house and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until the Little Red Riding Hood went home in the evening and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. Granny's a mind reader, apparently. In front of the house was a great stone trough. So she said to the child, "Take the pail, Red Riding Hood. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Red Riding Hood carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of the sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeked down, and at last stretched out his neck so far that he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough and was drowned. But Red Riding Hood went joyously home and never did anything to harm anyone. It's getting hot in here. The King of the Golden Mountain. A certain merchant had 2 children, a son and a daughter, both very young and scarcely able to run alone. He had 2 richly laden ships. Then, making a voyage upon the seas, in which he had remarked all his property, in the hope of making great gains, when the news came that they were lost. Thus, from being a rich man, he became very poor, so that nothing was left him but one small plot of land, and to relieve his mind a little of his trouble, he often went out to walk there. One day, as he was roving along, a little rough-looking dwarf stood before him and asked him why he was so sorrowful, and what it was that he took so deeply to heart. But the merchant replied, If you could do me any good, I would tell you."
"Who knows but I may?" said the little man. "Tell me what is the matter, and perhaps I can be of service."
Then the merchant told him how all his wealth was gone to the bottom of the sea, and how he had nothing left except that little plot of land.
"Oh, trouble not yourself about that," said the little dwarf. Only promise to bring me here 12 years hence whatever meets you first on your return home, and I will give you as much gold as you please."
The merchant thought this was no great request, that it would most likely be his dog or something of that sort, but forgot his little child. So he agreed to the bargain and signed and sealed the arrangement to do what is required. But as he drew near home, his little boy was so pleased to see him that he crept behind him and laid fast hold of his legs. When his father started with fear and saw what it was that he had bound himself to do, but as no gold was come, he counseled himself by thinking that it was only a joke that the dwarf was playing. About a month afterwards, he went upstairs and found an old lumber room to look for some old iron, that he might sell it and raise a little money. And there he saw a large pile of gold lying on the floor. At the sight of this, he was greatly delighted, went into trade again, and became a greater merchant than before. Meantime, his son grew up, and as the end of the 12 years drew near, the merchant became very anxious and thoughtful, so that care and sorrow were written upon his face. The son one day asked what was the matter, but his father refused to tell for some time. At last, however, he said that he had, without knowing it, sold him to a little ugly-looking dwarf for a great quantity of gold, and that the 12 years were coming round when he must perform his agreement. Then the son said, "There we go. Father, give yourself very little trouble about that. Depend upon it, I shall be too much for the little man." When the time came, they went out together to the appointed place, and the son drew a circle around on the ground and set himself and his father in the middle. The little dwarf soon came and said to the merchant,
"Have you brought me what I promised?"
The old man was silent, but his son answered, "What do you want here?"
The dwarf said, "I come to talk with your father, not with you."
"You have deceived and betrayed my father," said the son. "Give him up his bond."
"No," replied the other. "I will not yield up my rights."
Upon this, a long dispute arose, and at last it was agreed that the son should be put into an open boat and lay on the side of a piece of water hard by, and that the father should push him off with his own hand, so that he should be turned adrift. Then he took leave of his father and set himself in the boat. And as it was pushed oft, it heaved and fell onto one side into the water, so that the merchant thought that his son was lost, and went home very sorrowful. But the boat went safely on, and did not sink, and the young man sat securely within, till at length it ran ashore upon an unknown land. As he jumped upon the shore, he saw before him a beautiful castle, but empty and desolate within, for it was enchanted. At last, however, he found a white snake in one of the chambers. Now the white snake was an enchanted princess, and she rejoiced greatly to see him, and said, Art thou at last come to be my deliverer? 12 long years have I waited for thee, for thou alone can save me. This night 12 men will come, their faces will be black and will be hung round with chains. They will ask what thou dost here, but be silent. Give no answer, and let them do what they will. Beat and torment thee. Suffer all, only speak not a word. And at 12 o'clock they will depart. The second night 12 others will come, and the third night 24, who will even cut off thy head. But at the 12th hour of that night their power is gone, and I shall be free, and will come and bring thee the water of life, and will wash thee in it, and restore thee to life and health. And all came to pass as she had said. The merchant's son spoke not a word, and the third night the princess appeared, and fell on his neck and kissed him. Joy and gladness burst forth throughout the castle. The wedding was celebrated, and he was the king of the Golden Mountain. They lived together very happily, and the queen had a son. 8 years had passed over their heads when the king thought of his father, and his heart was moved, and he longed to see him once again. But the queen opposed this going, and said, I know well that misfortunes will come. However, he gave her no rest till she consented. At his departure she presented him a wishing ring. There we go. And said, Take this ring and put it on your finger. Whatever you wish it will bring you. Only promise that you will not make use of it to bring me hence to your fathers. Then he promised what she asked, and put the ring on his finger, and wished himself near the town where his father lived. He found himself at the gate in a moment, but the guards would not let him enter because he was so strangely clad. So he went up to a neighboring mountain where a shepherd dwelt, and borrowed his old frock, and thus passed unobserved into the town. When he came to his father's house, he said he was his son, but the merchant would not believe him, and said he had but one son who he knew was long since dead, and as he was only dressed like a poor shepherd, he would not even offer him anything to eat. The king, however, persisted that he was his son, and said, Is there no